welcome to the Intuitive Insights podcast series. I'm Nina Lockwood, founder and director of Intuitive Interim and Executive Search. Throughout this series, I will be sharing engaging conversations with talented leaders from across the UK transport sector. For episode 18 of the Intuitive Insights podcast, I was joined by Chris Green, who many consider to be a true railway legend. And after spending an hour in his company to record today's podcast, I can definitely understand why. I know you're going to enjoy this one. Chris Green, welcome to the Intuitive Insights podcast. I'm absolutely delighted, beyond delighted, that you have agreed to join me. And I wanted to introduce you, not using my words, but using John Nelson's words from his book, Losing Track. You are a substantial railway man of huge reputation. So, and I think that absolutely reflects everything I've been told in my 8.5 years that I've been working with the UK rail industry, is that your name is synonymous with leadership, it's synonymous with customer, and also with change and transformation that's happened in the industry. So I am looking forward, I can't wait to get started and to hand over to you to tell me in the first instance, Chris, what attracted you to the railway? Why did you come into this industry to start your career?
I don't know, but wasn't I lucky? Because for some reason I found the job I absolutely wanted to do, and I've never wanted to have any other job. So from a very young age, I was drawn to the railway. I went to school at a young age by train, went on my own by train probably at the age of 6. So I think I just got used to railways being an environment I like. It's a product I like. It's a useful product. It's got social purpose. I love the staff, I love the customers. And I think that's why it's made the leadership angle easy.
Yeah, it's that passion for it. So did you just say you were on a train on your own at the age of 6?
In those days we did. This was post-war when we just got on the underground and went to school on our own.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, now you'll find that extraordinary. To me, that was absolutely normal. We were all doing that. So it shows how times have changed.
It really does, doesn't it?
No school run in those days.
Absolutely not. Gosh, that blows my mind when I think about little people in my family. The idea of them getting on a train on their own. Gosh, your heart will be in your mouth now.
Yeah.
And so when you joined the railway, it was British Rail. So as a trainee manager, I believe, in the West Midlands in the first place. So tell us what happened from there, Chris, and your experiences through the years.
Well, it was a very low point in the rail industry's time. The Beeching report had just come out in 1965 saying that we had far too much railway and we should be shutting a lot of it, which was probably true to a large extent. But then the second report he wrote came out in 1966, I think, which said that there was a big future for intercity, for freightliners, and for merry-go-round coal trains. So he was getting positive, and that's, I think, what drew me into the industry. And I was very lucky that the railway management trainee scheme was excellent. It was 2 years, and they moved you all around the railway. They gave you lots of coaching. You were left to do things. You were left to operate similar boxes under supervision, everything except drive a train.
Right.
And after those 2 years, I got to the Birmingham division at the very time we were electrifying the West Coast. So I was at the cutting edge of a modern railway, exactly what I wanted.
Yeah.
So it was a good start.
Absolutely, it was. And I think it's fair to say that whilst there are elements of British Rail that are much lamented, actually, I think that the management training programme does, from so many people I've spoken to over the years, does seem to be held up as best in class.
Yes, I think it's probably best in the country in many ways. It really was very good, and it was well managed. It was a nice mixture of theory and practice. You had classroom tuitions, you went abroad to see other railways, and you moved around your own railway.
Yeah.
So I went to Birmingham, Stoke-on-Trent, Preston, Nottingham, Carlisle, all in the space of that time, and got a very good feel for the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. What an opportunity and what an industry to be part of as well,
yeah.
Giving you that kind of career progression.
And we went on joint training courses with the union leaders. So we did consultation training, consultation was a new idea at that time. There was negotiation before that, but then we added consultation. And we had a joint training school where we spent a week with the unions learning how to make it work.
Oh, wow, blimey! I hadn't heard of that before either.
That was fun.
I bet it was interesting times, and what a great idea, actually.
Yeah.
And as we're kind of moving full circle now to 2021 and collaboration being the absolute word of the moment,
Yes.
and working much more closely again with the trade unions, then I wonder if that's something that's been tabled at any of these planning meetings with the various different groups that are.
It certainly should be, because you find out after the first beer that you're both just as interested in the railways as the other one, and it's just a different take on the same problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And so where did you end up next after Birmingham, after the Midlands, and you've done your trainee manager, been around all of those different locations? What happened next?
I think at Birmingham it became pretty clear that my first love was the passenger side of the railway, and that was, as it happened, the growth side. I was lucky. The freight was in decline and passenger was growing. And secondly, that I loved being out with the product, and I'm not a head office person. Right. So I quickly became a passenger manager at Nottingham. I became an area manager in Birmingham, and then at Hull. I was 4 years at Hull as area manager, and those were really creative jobs. I loved them both.
So when you say creative, Chris, what do you mean?
The Birmingham job was, we've just electrified this railway. We've doubled the number of seats we got on the trains. How on earth are we going to fill them? And it was left to me to sort it out. Right. You really had that freedom, and that was only my third job in the industry. Right. And we did manage it. We invented mystery trains where you paid £10 and didn't know where you were going to go to. So the destination was a mystery. And of course, some people ended up going straight back to their hometown, which was the one place they didn't want to go to. But you could fill trains with 500 people with no trouble in those days, because people were looking for something different.
Okay, so like a magical mystery tour.
Yes.
So a day out on the train, but you don't know where you're going.
Absolutely. But if you lived at Cromer or somewhere, it was bad news.
Oh, my goodness. I think we ought to bring these back. I think this sounds like a great idea for the Great British Railways team to be looking at. I love that idea. Fantastic.
It happened. And the staff loved it, because they entered into the spirit of it. You couldn't tell the passengers what the destination was, but the staff knew. So they were teasing the passengers on the journey. So tremendous comradeship in that. And then at Hull, where I was area manager, very interesting job, because the freight side was running down through no fault of the railway. The docks were almost shutting, but the passenger side had been neglected. So there was a double challenge there. How do you keep morale up on the freight side, and how do you get people creative and passenger friendly on the passenger side? Yeah. And we managed it, but it was very much with the union's help. So those early days in joint training with the unions did work, and we had to find things which were in common. So there was a very good redundancy arrangement. The staff were at a very high age group, so a large number chose to take redundancy at that time, which helped. And then I was putting my energy, of course, into running mystery trains and getting more passenger services into Hull, and of course more staff. So there was a trade-off with the unions.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And exciting times, I would imagine.
I look back on them as happy days.
I bet you do. You can tell that as you describe it to me, yeah.
And again, tremendous freedom. There was a very delegated railway. You weren't told what to do. You had to work out what to do.
So very, very different to maybe...
Now it's much more process-driven.
Yeah, absolutely. So after Hull, where next?
A jump to London, where I suddenly found myself running I was operations manager at Waterloo, so I was running the services out of Waterloo all the way down to Southampton and Portsmouth. Right. And if you've been responsible for Waterloo's fear for any other railway job after that, I can assure you. Yeah. If you just stand at the end of the platform on the rush hour, there were trains pouring in and out every few seconds.
So it's always been a busy station then?
Yes, it has. And the skill, of course, was when things went wrong. If anything stops at Waterloo, you're in trouble within minutes. And so that was a very pragmatic skill.
Yes.
And again, you had to respect your staff. The trick was to recognize the signallers were the experts on what to do when things went wrong, trust them and support them.
And when you look at that particular point in your career, is there anything that stands out as kind of, well, that's what I learnt there? Do you know, kind of as we look back and reflect on different roles that we've done and different places we've been, different things can sometimes stand out. Was there anything at Waterloo that you remember as being the big learning?
In all of them, I think, and it's such a simple thing, really. It's listen to the staff. They do actually know a lot more than you do about the problem. So I very quickly learned if you shared a problem with the staff, you usually got the right answer. And then the problem then was to find the money and get agreement to make it happen. But most of my ideas have come from the mess room, or talking on stations, or talking to passengers on trains.
Yeah.
You don't have to impose views on people.
No, but so it's interesting, isn't it? Because there are leaders in every different industry sector who believe that they ought to have all of the answers because they're in that leadership position. And certainly from my perspective, I think the leaders who are the most effective leaders are the ones who do exactly what you've just said and listen to people.
Yeah, and it really works. And by sharing those problems in Hull, for example, with the staff, you found that they had contacts with local councillors and communities and so on, and you were suddenly being put in touch with the whole network. And you were networking with your staff, with the community.
Yeah.
And that's where the energy comes from. The community then started putting flowers on stations and writing complimentary letters in the press saying how much better the area was. And there's a bit of third-party ambassadorship is always good.
Always good. And I think to this day, community rail partnerships do an amazing job. There's, they do the flowers on stations and they make it look nice.
And it's never been better, but we'll come to that later on.
Great stuff happening. I won't steal your thunder on that, but I've been bowled over by some of the stuff that the community rail partnerships are doing. It's just incredible. So after Waterloo, what comes next? What could top Waterloo?
Yes. So I ended up in Scotland. Big leap, to my wife's surprise and horror. It was a 400-mile move, and we'd only just settled in London.
Oh goodness, right.
So and it was probably the happiest time of my life. The Scots made us tremendously welcome. I got 3 superb jobs, one after the other there. So you were bringing the experience from the first job to the second, and from the second to the third. First one was operations manager for Scotland. Second one was deputy general manager, and the third one was general manager, where we became ScotRail, which was the big moment. Yeah. So Scotland was a very remote part of the British Rail Empire in those days, and was rather run down. It wasn't getting the investment. The investment was tending to go to the East Coast and the West Coast. And I'd had the fortunate experience of working in the British Railway Board for the year before I went. So I had lots of contacts at the centre. And I fed back how appalled I was at the lack of investment in stations, in trains, in staff mess rooms, in passenger information systems, in training, uniforms. And I got a lot of support for this. So gradually our budget got bigger. We overspent and people turned a blind eye. Thank you. We got a lot more done there.
Yeah.
And we established the principle that if we save money, we could keep it and reinvest it in Scotland. And that was enormously motivating. So I would always pass that on. Never take the money back from someone who's saving money. Let them spend it on something worthwhile. So the money we saved on freight rationalisation, we reinvested in stations and all the things you now see today. We painted up every station in Scotland in 3 years, 300 of them, from Inverness down to Lockerbie.
Right.
We introduced a new signalling system on the Highland Line, which made the line's future safe. Before that, we were worried about its future. Once we put all the economies in, it was safe. And we invented the name ScotRail. And the name ScotRail was thought up in half an hour, and it was the best thing we did. The staff loved it, the public loved it, the politicians loved it. It was every politician's idea. They thought of it. We didn't argue with them.
Absolutely, yeah.
And it became the people's railway. And so no one would dare, even today, touch ScotRail. You wouldn't shut a service in Scotland. You wouldn't reduce the service. There's a national pride in the railway there we've never quite achieved in the rest of the railway system.
it's interesting, isn't it? You say that was kind of chosen in half an hour, and people were bought into that and felt like they owned it. There's such a lot of criticism levied at the new name that we've got, and whether an agency was used and how much a marketing agency was paid to do that. And you kind of think, well, yes, I think actually sit some railway leaders round a table and perhaps provide a couple of bottles of wine or a few beers, and half an hour later you probably would have come up with the same name.
It's not always easy. So some names are easy. London Transport's a natural for London, and ScotRail's a natural for Scotland. So we had a natural one. When I came down to London, Network South East was a struggle. So London Rail doesn't work because it all goes all the way down to Whitstable and Southampton and places. But we ended up with Network South East as a compromise, and it works. It became NSE. And I think what I learned from that is the name doesn't matter too much, actually. Once people have got used to it and they're proud of it, you'll find with Great Britain's railways, it'll be just as good.
Absolutely, I agree. And so your time in Scotland was an enjoyable one then, a happy one?
It was the ultimate delegation. 400 miles from headquarters, no one double guessing you, enthusiastic staff who wanted to improve their railway. Enthusiastic politicians. I've never had so many local councils offering us money to invest. And we reopened stations. I think we reopened 10 stations, all with council money, and all with local communities putting flowers onto them and coming to help us clean them. And in the Highlands, of course, you just can't start every small station in the Highlands. So you depend on the community adopting it rather like a local post office.
Right.
So all that worked well, and then the final one was when two local councils got together and helped us reopen the railway, the Bathgate line.
Right.
And that was immediately labelled rolling back beaching, because we were reopening something he'd shut.
Yeah.
And I think for that breakthrough, government suddenly realised it was okay to reopen railways, and that I think was where the door opened on future railway reopenings.
Right. So you showed them the way.
Yes. But we didn't have to ask London. We were 90% independent.
Right, and just got on with it, which is it makes such a difference, doesn't it? When you've got the autonomy to be able to lead a team to get on with it, who are on the ground and they understand what the local area needs and the local passengers need.
But it's also worth saying the chairman, who was a Scot, Bob Reid, was what I was doing, so full marks to him for allowing that freedom. He could easily have stopped us and said you're over budget or you're doing something that's not official, but he didn't. He quietly encouraged it.
Yeah, very good. Quiet encouragement is always good, I find.
Yes.
And so after Scotland, back down south again.
Well, that same chairman, Bob Reid, phoned up, and he was a man of few words, and he said, you're coming south. And the other few words were, I want you to do a ScotRail.
Oh.
that was all I was ever told.
Right.
So,
that was your job description.
Yes. It turned out to be London and South East, as it was then called.
Right.
And it was in an appalling state. No money. So the money was still all going on intercity, and it wasn't going on the suburban railways. So the stations looked as though the war had just happened. Broken glass, grey paint, grime everywhere, miserable passengers and disillusioned staff.
No wonder.
So wasn't I lucky? Because everything I learnt in Scotland, you could cut and paste into London. Absolutely everything. So start with finding a good name which rallies everyone, which Network South East. Smarten the whole product up. We painted every station. There were 900 stations in London to paint, and that was a massive operation. Get massive commitment to investment. The investment was big stuff in London. This was not something I could do. We had to have government support. And we were lucky. There was a government minister, David Mitchell, father of today's Andrew Mitchell.
Oh, right, okay.
Was a rail enthusiast quietly and gave us huge private support. And he bought a large silver cup, that's what you present at horse races, and he said he would present this every 3 months to the bit of London which had made the biggest improvements. And we had 9, no, we didn't, we had 16 railways in London.
Right.
So this cup moved around the 16. The media followed the minister, and suddenly it was really fashionable to have successful railways.
Right.
And nobody wants to be at the bottom of the league table, do they?
Of
so
course not.
everyone was trying to win that cup.
Yeah.
Very exciting period.
Isn't that interesting how something so straightforward, and obviously it wasn't just about the silver cup.
And I didn't think of that. That was the minister's own idea.
Yeah, but it's made a difference. It's rallied people, hasn't it? And it's given people a focus, which is so important. And yes, it's the silver cup is there. That's a tangible thing that you have sat in your office. But it's everything that is underneath that in terms of what it means, isn't it, about improving the railway?
And he got huge pleasure out of joining us and doing it, and we got huge pleasure out of him supporting our investment cases.
Yes,
further down the line.
It worked both ways. Yeah,
it was a good deal.
Yeah.
Again, the chairman was fully aware of what was going on, but we were left to get on with it. So I was running a third of the railway then, with almost no interference at all.
Right.
Until the money ran out. So when the Treasury ran out of money in 1989, when everything went wrong with the pound, remember we were tracking the euro at the time, and in 3 weeks we lost all our money. The Treasury just said there is no more money, everything's got to stop. And that's when we ran out of tricks. There was nothing else we could do.
No.
Luckily, I'd foreseen this couldn't go on forever, so we've been rushing our things through. Everyone accused us of doing things too fast, but the reason was I was terrified the money would run out. So we had got our trains renewed, we had got the stations upgraded. Cecil Parkinson was by then the Secretary of State for Transport, and he supported a new build of trains for us just before the economic crash. And he even went to see Maggie Thatcher in Chequers to get the thing signed. I thought was very brave of him.
Right.
3 weeks after it was signed, the economic crash came, and we would not have got those trains had he not helped.
Oh.
Because once you've got the contract signed, you're safe. If the contract hadn't been signed, the Treasury could have stopped it.
Right. Cecil might well have had the same inkling that you had then.
I think he did.
A sense of urgency. We need to get this. We need to get the signature on the dotted line.
So he was on side too. But that's an example where you do need friends up above you as well as down below you. So you needed the staff on side to make the new trains attractive to the customer, but you needed the senior politicians and your own board to get the thing done. And it was £600 million.
Yeah,
we were signing off on a Saturday.
A lot of money. Yeah, a lot of money. A lot of money now, but certainly a lot of money then.
And those new trains kept coming and coming, and of course we called them networkers because they ran on Network Southeast.
Yeah. Yeah. So a challenging time, but another really strong demonstration there of what we now refer to as stakeholder engagement and management. That's kind of, so certainly over the last few years, what I've noticed is that when I first joined the railway 8.5 years ago, then when I took a brief, an assignment from a client for a new role, a lot of that discussion would be around the technical competence required to do the role.
Yes.
And there was a noticeable shift, I would say 3 or 4 years ago, when it became more and more important to have what we would refer to as interpersonal skills. So we want people who have got strong interpersonal ability to be able to engage and manage stakeholder relationships.
Yes.
And that's what, you're giving us some great examples of there.
But strangely enough, it was easier to do in the nationalised British Rail days than it is today in the private days. Well, we'll come to that when we get to the private railway, but it was so easy in those days. We just naturally all did it.
Yeah.
I think one reason was we'd all grown up together. We were in the same village, if you like, the railway village. We trusted each other. We had professional experts who really, really knew the railway backwards. And you could say to them, just do it. Nowadays you can't. You've got contracts and safety cases and business studies.
Yeah, a lot more process, as you were saying before. Yeah. So what comes next after the excitement of 1989 and the new trains just about getting over the line with that contract?
Yes.
What happened next?
So it was the end of an era. We'd finished massive amount of investment in electrification, in new trains, in new stations, opening 2 lines, in fact. And then, of course, what does one do when there's no money? And the chairman said, I think you'll be a lot happier in intercity. So I was moved before I got too frustrated. To intercity, and then almost weeks later I was standing by the radio in the press office and heard the announcement that the government was going to privatise the rail industry, which would have been fine by me, but they were going to do it in a very fragmented way. They wanted to break it up into as many small pieces as they could, which was the end of the world for intercity and Network Southeast, of course.
Right.
Previous nationalised industries, like the airlines, had just been nationalised and left to reorganise themselves. The railway, unusually, the government decided that was going to be reorganised. So that was a very disillusioning period. And my time at Intercity was really helping 300 people in the Intercity headquarters come to terms with having no role and finding new jobs. And in a year, every single one of them, bar two, managed to get a job or get retirement, whichever they wanted. So
Right.
these are very high caliber people who went straight out into private industry. They were accepted overnight. And that reminded me just how good we were in those days, but we didn't realize it because we had no one to compare ourselves to.
Of course, yeah.
It was a very closed shop. So I went back to Scotland, but that didn't work. And then eventually, once we were privatised, Richard Branson asked me if I'd come back and run Virgin Trains for him, which
Right.
is what we know as the West Coast and cross country. And I wasn't over enthusiastic about it at the time because I was still in a bit of a sulk that they'd wrecked up industry. And why should I want to take a small bit of what was in the city?
Yeah.
Luckily, he did persuade me in his inimitable way, and I'm glad I did because he gave me a lot of freedom. And what I did say at the interview is, I don't have to do this, and I only work best when you give me freedom. He was quite famous on the airline for interfering in the detail. If he was on the aeroplane, he was telling you how to do it, etc.
Yeah.
And he kept his word. He never interfered on the railway. He asked if he could help.
Yeah.
We were getting a lot of bad publicity because it wasn't going well at that time on the West Coast. And when he phoned up, it was always, sorry about that press article you got. Can I help you put it right? But a very supportive person.
Yeah.
And that's not always his image.
And that's really interesting because when you said Richard Branson asked me to help out on Virgin Trains, but I wasn't over enthusiastic, my mind immediately went to, oh, I wonder how he took that then. I can't imagine him being a person who would accept no for an answer.
No, he didn't. Well, being Branson, of course, he said, I'm going off on a balloon trip across Africa. If I should return safely, please come and see me on the 7th of January. So I must admit, making me wait a fortnight, I was much more enthusiastic about that interview.
Yeah, so a good ploy. Yeah.
Yep. And he had me down on his own to his house, and he said, I know exactly where you're coming from because we'd had crosswords when I was in the city.
Right.
And he said, let's put all that behind us. There's one hell of a railway to modernise here. We've got agreement to do everything you ever wanted, which is true. Upgrading the West Coast, tilt trains, which we would never have got in British Rail days.
Yeah.
And I said, but would I have the freedom to manage and introduce these? And he said, yes. But then when you've done that, your project's over, you retire, and someone else comes in to run the finished product, which was spot on. So he was dead right there. I was the right person for the transition using my railway skills. I probably wasn't the right person to be a young go-ahead Virgin Trains type.
Right.
And he got that right. And it's been a huge success since. But I got the short straw because those 5 years of getting the West Coast to work were a nightmare. The worst experience I've ever had.
Yeah.
And it
so
was
a
everything
complete
that was wrong.
contrast to what you experienced, say, with ScotRail, when everything seemed to go well.
Yes.
You did have a huge amount of challenge.
The comparison is the East Coast electrification was a £1 billion scheme done, and the passengers barely noticed it had happened. It was done on time, on budget, and finished just before Intercity ceased to exist. The West Coast upgrade was chaos. The privatisation, but of course they'd thrown away all the experience. So on the East Coast, you had experienced engineers in-house doing the jobs. West Coast would start again, bring contractors in, let's have lots of contractors, let's have competitive procurement. You had Network Rail as a totally different organisation to Virgin Trains, almost in competition with each other. And it ended up with Railtrack going into administration because it became bankrupt. It had signed a contract it couldn't deliver. And Virgin Trains being in administration for government, really, for 3 years. So we used that interim time to let the railwayman get the thing sorted out.
And so as much as there was lots of challenge there, and perhaps it wasn't all plain sailing and I guess positive times at Virgin. Just what stands out for you, Chris, as being the best bits?
Well, the best of all the jobs.
Of Virgin Trains specifically.
Virgin Trains, yeah. I think it's the fact we stood our ground. We were getting massive criticism the whole time. We didn't know if we were going to keep our company or our jobs. And we did what we did best. We went out there and stood with the staff. I spent most of my Friday evenings on Euston Concourse with passengers who had no trains. On Saturday, you can bet someone rang up and said the cable's been cut during the modernisation and we're going to have no trains between London and Milton Keynes. No way. So we all trooped out to Euston Station and Milton Keynes, got the replacement bus services going, etc. And the staff did appreciate that, I think. Yeah. And I found the staff massively supportive. You're asking people to change their shifts, to work overtime, to go to destinations they didn't normally go to. I can't remember anyone saying no.
Yeah.
So there was teamwork. We didn't get any credit for it in public, but we did keep the railway going somehow.
Yeah, absolutely. And so at the end of that, was it kind of with a heavy heart that you retired, or was it kind of like, well, thank goodness for that? I know you've been busy since, but
it felt the right time. And Branson, to his credit, they made it very clear at the beginning, you're here for the transition.
Yeah.
That's when we need you, and we'll support you all the way in that. So once we got the trains running at 125 miles an hour and tilting, and the new passenger services in the timetable, we invited Tony Blair, who's the Prime Minister, and Richard Branson to come to Euston Station, see the first train off with a big band of Coldstream Guards.
Right.
And that was a eureka moment.
I bet it was. I bet that was a kind of hairs on the back of your neck standing up for that.
And Tony Blair said to me, I almost didn't come because we'd been such bad news to the government, of course, the rail industry, but he said, I'm glad I did.
Fantastic.
So that was a nice break. And my successors have made a super job of it. It's one of the best running railways in Europe.
Yeah. It's really great to hear this from your perspective, because over my 8.5 years, I've spoken to so many people who have worked for you and with you on the railway, and everything you're saying about how you engage with people and the support that you had from the staff that worked in your team is absolutely replicated by what they say of you as a leader. So it's lovely to hear your side of the story and hear that kind of echo your kind of admiration for them and the part they played in keeping the railway running.
We enjoyed being together. What I should say in fairness is I was not the right person for the commercial contracts that came with privatisation, and I had to have experts who did that. And my deputy was the expert in the commercial contracts.
Right.
And was the one who got a lot of money off government for Virgin for all the failures that happened since we signed the contract.
Yeah.
And, you're not one person, are you? My contribution is more on the doing side. His contribution was more on the commercial side.
Which is another sign of a great leader, is somebody who accepts that they can't do everything and they need to bring people in who are better than them.
Absolutely. I did not want his job.
I wouldn't want it either. So I know obviously you have kept very busy since then, Chris, with various different roles and still many of them involved in the railway. And I would imagine keep a very keen eye on what is going on and what the latest developments are. I would love to hear your views on where we stand currently, and what would your wishes be? Where do you see the opportunities for the railway as we move forward? And if you were in charge, what would or that I could give you a magic wand and say, right, okay, what are your 3 wishes? What would they be?
I guess the starting point is retirement wasn't easy. You don't just suddenly stop work. So again, I was lucky because the private railway does have more opportunities for non-executive directors, for advisors, for consultants. So I've been able to have a second career, if you like, advising and observing. And I've increasingly enjoyed that. And for a doing person, that was quite difficult.
Yes,
so you have to watch other people doing. You mustn't interfere, but you just gently say, perhaps if you tried it that way, it might work better.
Yes.
So I've developed that skill, and I've had a lot of interesting jobs. I went to Eurotunnel as an advisor. I went to Network Rail. Dover Harbour Board, Heathrow Express, and the two most recent ones, which I really enjoyed, getting Thameslink up and running. And now what I'm currently doing, my very last job, is getting Crossrail up and running. And I'm only a very small cog in these now, but it's just fun watching how they're doing it compared to how we would have done it in our time.
Yeah.
And the big difference we've already touched on is how bureaucratic everything is nowadays. To take 2 years before you can change a timetable is absolutely ridiculous in the age of computers. And it's been very interesting with COVID. People suddenly found they can get the old British Rail skills and change the timetable in 12 weeks. It can be done, but you've got to throw away some process and trust your people. And I think I'm seeing the industry beginning to go back to trusting people, and perhaps it's a more stable industry. Perhaps the industry is relying less on contractors and on its own staff. And obviously you trust your own staff more.
Yeah.
I found Thameslink very good at this. There's a very good culture in Thameslink where everyone is working together. The managers do get out and work with the staff and follow up what they're suggesting. And I get great comfort from that things are going to come right again.
I completely agree with you on that. I think that Patrick Verver's doing a great job, and he's got a very strong team of people around him.
Yes.
But,
Steve White for one.
Absolutely.
That's right.
Yeah. I've got a huge amount of respect for Steve. He actually was one of my first podcast guests last December, and he is another person that I could quite honestly just sit with for hours and listen to his experience.
He's on my list.
Yeah,
What's interesting with Steve, he's got no ego. He doesn't go out to say, "Here am I? I'm important. I'm the chief operating officer," but he's aware of everything that's going on. So he just quietly gets around.
I know, and I find it absolutely incredible how he can remember all this stuff.
Yes.
Great, knowledge is amazing, and we have some exceptionally talented people in UK Rail, exceptionally talented, and more and more so what I'm seeing from my perspective is that these people are the people. So yes, they have a love of the railway, and sometimes that includes the engineering side and the train side, but actually the people who are standing out as leaders for me now as we're moving forward are the people who get that this isn't about the trains, it's about the people.
Yes.
That's what it is for me.
And you're spot on. And there are now, I find, two types of railwomen. One is the American business school process person who doesn't want to be up front. And the other is the upfront manager who's not allowed to get on with it. And I'm seeing things are improving. They're recognizing they need both. And you do need both.
Yeah.
And I can think of several people I would admire who are making these things work now. And Steve White will be one of them.
Yeah.
So my other job, the Crossrail one, feels like West Coast upgrade without the passengers. Right. You've got this massive frustration of millions of contractors and subcontractors all trying to get their act together. Everyone's trying really hard, and it is going to come right, but it's incredibly difficult. It's a genuinely complicated project, made twice as complicated by processes and contracts and bureaucracy. And all the other things we have to do before we do anything.
Yeah.
So you will be riding on it next year, but it's been a frustrating experience.
Yeah, I shall look forward to it. I think that your point about trust as well is an interesting one, because a few of my podcast guests who, like you, came through the British Rail Management Scheme, people like Diane Crowther, Mark Hopwood, who talk about having really senior roles at a relatively young age, being kind of in their early 20s and having significantly senior roles. Absolutely. So there's that kind of trust that was there. But I suppose as the processes and the contracts and all the other bureaucracy that you've mentioned comes into play, then it removes you from that kind of that level of trust, doesn't it? Because
looking back, what I can now see, when I was put into these jobs at the age of 25, I had a huge support structure all around me. You had a stable railway, everyone knew their jobs, and they could live with the idiot Green appearing on the scene. If you now go to a train company, Heathrow Express, for example, there were only, I think, 14 managers, and you had to pull your weight. There was no one to help you. You were the only operator in that one, so there was no one to hold you up if you got it wrong. Right. So, of course, you need more bureaucracy and more rules and more support.
Absolutely. There's a balance, isn't there?
So if you fragment the railway, you do, I think, fragment experience.
Yeah,
So, answering your question, I'm hugely enthusiastic for getting the railway back under one leadership. We need Eisenhower who pulls the railway together and leads us forward. And I think Great British Railways, I'm still getting used to the name, is going to be fine for that. The important thing is not the name, it's getting power back from government and uniting the railway into one place. There's nowhere at the moment where you can go to sort out a national timetable easily. You've got Network Rail, but you haven't got the train companies who are actually running them in one place. So Great British Railways brings us all together again in one place. And it's not nationalisation, it's a sort of private-public partnership.
Yeah.
And if what I'm hearing is right, that Peter Hendy and Andrew Haynes are going to run it, you couldn't have two better people to do it. They've got the public service spirit, they've got the railway experience, and they've got the ear of government. So my absolute wish is to get that GBR organisation up and running. Second big wish is to get robust funding for the railway industry, and I've been saying this all my railway life.
Yeah.
What you really want is for the Treasury to say, here is a 10-year funding plan, and unless there's a national emergency, that will be stable. You can then have a continuous electrification program, rolling electrification, where every year you do 50 miles of electrification. All the other railways in Europe do the same for signalling. And do the same for new trains, for example. But I think as a flip side to that, if the government's going to give us that sort of commitment on investment, they're also going to want a commitment on productivity. And the railways have got massively more expensive since British Rail, and British Rail gave very, very good value for money.
Yeah.
So, of course, there wasn't any money, so we had to make a pound go a long way.
Yeah.
Privatization, for some reason, there's been far too much money around, and it's much too easy to throw money at schemes, or indeed salaries, I'm afraid. So we are going to have to think what we can afford if we want to have a railway which the government supports with a lot of investment. We've been incredibly lucky to get HS2 investment in the middle of the COVID crisis.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But that's not going to go on if we're going to be a very expensive industry.
No.
And my third one is to make you all love us. We want the public to be proud of us. And it's doing a ScotRail on the national scale. So we want people to go aboard and say, oh, we got a great railway.
Yeah.
And some countries do it. So when you meet someone from Switzerland, they normally tell you they've got a great railway. I would like the Brits to do that.
Yeah.
And this means it's got to be really clean and efficient, and it's got to feel good, which is perfectly possible. We've got to have friendly staff. We mustn't go on strike every time there's a dispute. We've got to learn to settle disputes without strikes. And we've got to invest.
Yeah.
And all that's doable, but it takes time.
I agree.
ScotRail took 5 years. Network South East took 10 years. GBR could take 20, but it's worth doing.
That's it. It's not overnight, but I absolutely am a firm believer that the romance of the railway is still very much there. Yeah. It's just buried under a few layers of stuff. Yeah. So I think when we start kind of reopening and welcoming people back to the railway, we would never have wished this situation to have happened that we've all been through in the last 15, 16 months. But I think what it's done is shown us what the art of the possible is. You made the point earlier, Chris, about how we showed we can do things quickly. Yeah. We can be fleet of foot when we need to be, when we trust people to get on with it. Yeah. I think it's also demonstrated really strongly that we're capable of fantastic collaboration with every single part of the industry all joined together.
COVID's brought us together.
Absolutely, it has. I'm just hoping that we can keep hold of that as we move forward into the future.
I don't think anyone will want to go backwards. Now we've rediscovered doing things fast and efficiently, we shall. And a nice example, Network Rail, when COVID started, I think in March, the original March gate, they procured all the protective clothing they needed in 16 days. Masks, gloves, gowns and everything. It just quietly did it. And the National Health Service knew what Network Rail was doing, and we weren't taking stuff away from the health service. Yeah. But we found a system which could produce it very fast.
Yeah.
Lovely example. Let's do it on our own railway now.
Really good example, yeah. And you know, you and I are both judges for the National Rail Awards, and I did the judging last week for the Outstanding Personal Contribution category. As usual, I was in tears. That happens every single year. But some of the responses that individual people have made to the pandemic and the things they've done that have made a huge difference. And not just pandemic related, of course, but you know, there were a significantly higher number of entries this year than we've had previously, because people really have gone above and beyond in terms of their day job to how they could respond to the pandemic. And you referred to this earlier when you talked about why you came into the rail industry. It's that kind of social purpose that's been demonstrated so clearly, hasn't it?
It has, and we are a community.
Yeah.
And a very pleasant community. I've never had a bad word.
Yeah, no, I completely agree.
And it's not how the public see us, unfortunately.
No, it isn't.
It's how it feels inside.
We're the best kept secret, Chris, from that perspective. I keep saying this to people, you know. I will say to Nigel Harris frequently, it's my soapbox topic. It's like, well, we all talk about how good we are to each other, but we need to do it beyond. We need to kind of beyond the railway family and talk about what an amazing industry this is to work in. And I wouldn't want to work anywhere else.
I agree. In my case, I'm doing the station judging for the National Rail Awards, and that gets me around the country, of course, literally from Inverness to Penzance.
Absolutely.
And I'm amazed how high the quality now is of both the stations and the staff. There are no bad stations.
Yeah. You had a huge number of entries this year, didn't you?
And I can't remember meeting a bad member of staff. Everyone's out there doing their best. The stations look good. And okay, we may need a bit more investment, but what a change from the railway I joined.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'd have struggled to take you to a good station in 1965.
It's all good. It all bodes well. So all the way through this conversation, Chris, you've been dropping in nuggets, golden nuggets in terms of leadership advice. And this is, as I've said, you know, this is something that you are absolutely best known for. If leaders in rail are mentioned, your name is top of the list. What's important to you? And I may be asking you to repeat yourself here a bit, but in terms of leadership, what's your advice for the people who are working in industry now? What would be your advice in terms of leadership?
It's about keeping management, staff and customers close together. And that means moving around between them the whole time. Standing on Euston Concourse, you're seeing the product, you're talking to the customers, you're talking to the staff. And if you can find out what it needs doing in all those three areas and make it happen, the world's your oyster. Yeah. But somehow bureaucracy has got in the way. So we've got to cut through a lot of these processes. The pendulum swung too far, and we can't go back to anarchy. But if I was looking for a motto, it would be just do it.
Fantastic.
We lost the art of saying to someone, just do it.
Yeah.
We analyze things to death when it's often blindingly obvious that it's a small amount of money and we should just do it.
Just do it. And so is that the quote you would like to leave us with? I always ask my guests to share a quote that they'd kind of like to end the conversation on, and that one sounds like a good one to me. And
you would add the word responsibly, of course, but just do it responsibly. If it seems the right thing, if everyone agrees it's right, if there's no great obstacle, just do it.
Brilliant. Chris, I could sit here and talk to you all afternoon, quite honestly. I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I feel like I've had a lesson in railway history in the last hour. There's so much that you're saying to me that I can recognise as things that we need to be remembering that have worked in the past, and we need to take them forward into the future. And I am hugely grateful to you for joining me on the Intuitive Insights podcast. I can't thank you enough.
I've loved it too, and good luck to Great British Railways.
Thank you very much. With my thanks to Chris Green for joining me for the final episode of this series of Intuitive Insights podcast. I've had some amazing guests over the last few months. We're taking a break over the summer, and we will be back in September with some more Intuitive Insights. Please do come and join us.